Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is March 30th. Today in garden history, we celebrate the birth of Henry Wotton. He was an English writer, diplomat, and politician, and he was born on this day, March 30th, in 1568. Henry celebrated relationships with gardens and landscapes. He especially enjoyed gardens that made one think or offered a surprise. Henry served as an ambassador to Venice, and during his time there, he fell in love with Italian gardens. Henry's concept of a garden of surprise was inspired by the gardens that he saw in Italy. In his 1624 book called Elements of Architecture, Henry discusses what it was like to walk through an Italian garden. He wrote, "I have seen a garden into which the first entry point was a high walk like a terrace, from where you could take in a general view of the whole plot below, but rather in a delightful confusion. And from this point, the beholder, descending any steps, was afterward conveyed again to various entertainments of scent and sight. And every one of these diversities was if he had been magically transported to a new garden." And today we celebrate the heavenly birthday of Paul-Marie Verlaine, the French poet who was born on this day, March 30th, in 1844. Paul-Marie is remembered for his work with the Symbolist movement and the Decadent movement. His poem, Clair de Lune, begins with the line, "Your soul is a sealed garden." And it was this poem that inspired Claude Debussy to write his own Clair de Lune, the work for which he is now most famous. But Paul-Marie, in his poem Clair de Lune, wrote these words, "Here are fruits, flowers, leaves, and branches, and here is my heart, which beats only for you." And finally, today is also the birthday of Vincent van Gogh, the Dutch post-impressionist painter. He was born on this day, March 30th, in 1853. After his death, Vincent became a top-selling figure in the history of Western art. His work was characterized by bold colors and brushwork. Vincent found inspiration in the natural world. He once said, "If you truly love nature, you will find beauty everywhere." Vincent was also a lover of flowers and gardens. He wrote, "How right it is to love flowers in the greenery of pines and ivy and hawthorn hedges." And he also said, "For one's health, as you say, it is very necessary to work in the garden and see the flowers growing." At the end of his life, Vincent van Gogh was suffering from depression. He had an unsuccessful painting career, and he was impoverished. And although history now questions the circumstances of his death, we know that he was shot in the chest at the age of 37, and he died 2 days later beside a stack of his sunflower canvases. He said his last words to his brother Theo, "The sadness will last forever." The legacy of Vincent's 2,100 pieces of art was much brighter than he ever expected. In March of 1987, his painting titled Vase with 15 Sunflowers was sold by Sotheby's in London for almost $40 million, more than 3 times the highest price ever paid at the time for a painting at auction. And it was on this day, March 30th in 2003, that the Fort Worth Star-Telegram shared an article called What's in a Name? Deciding the name of every plant could take decades and require a huge effort by Stephanie Simon. The article revealed that, quote, the Missouri Botanical Garden is teaming up with botanists worldwide in a 10-year, $100 million effort to standardize plant names. The article shared the forecast for finishing the project. It was kind of fun looking back at this. Here's what it said. The project's leaders' plan for the database is 45 compiler years. One note says 52 imager years. And at the bottom, there's a final tally. They will need a staff of 32 for at least a decade just to compile and input the information. That's not counting the botanists who will do all the research. The Missouri scientists will be working in formal collaboration with 2 other top botanical research centers in the world, the New York Botanical Garden and the Kew Botanical Gardens near London. Well, incredibly, this project was completed way ahead of schedule at the end of 2010. At the time, the plant list included 1.25 million scientific plant names. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Writing Wild by Catherine Alto. This book came out in the summer of 2020, and the subtitle is Women Poets, Ramblers, and Mavericks Who Shape How We See the Natural World. Oh, this is such a good book, and I've been waiting to recommend it on the show. Catherine herself was inspired to write this book after stumbling on a book that was written with all male voices, and she wanted to find the female voices and add their perspective on the natural world. And so there are about 75 women that are talked about in Catherine's book. And the goal behind curating all of these pieces was to help us deepen our connection to and understanding of the natural world. Now, some of these readers have some of my old favorites like Mary Oliver, Vita Sackville West, Mary Austin, Susan Fenimore Cooper. But then there are also new voices like Helen MacDonald, Andrea Wolfe, Amy Liptrot, and Elizabeth Rush. And there are 25 of these women whose works are shared in full in this book. And I love what Catherine wrote in the introduction. She says, much of this book was researched and penned outside mountain climbing, mudlarking, canoeing, beachcombing, gardening, hiking, and birdwatching. I retraced the footsteps of those who have passed on, some of whom wrote anonymously or were chastised for daring to venture off without male chaperones. I walked and talked with living authors. I read original 19th century journals, letters, essays, and books. I held tangible personal objects. I searched the faces in old photographs. I listened to historians, archivists, and experts. I attended live author readings and listened to recordings. I passed through 200 years of women's history through nature writing. Remarkable. Well, these compilation books are so wonderful because Catherine has done the heavy lifting for us. She has sifted through all of this nature writing, and she has brought us the best of the best, a wonderful sampling of women writing about nature over the past 2 centuries. And now I just have to quickly share two wonderful quotes that she includes at the top of the book. There's three of them there, but I'm going to read two of them. The first is from Willa Cather in her 1913 book, O Pioneers, one of my favorite quotes. She wrote, "Isn't it queer? There are only 2 or 3 human stories, and they go on repeating themselves as fiercely as if they had never happened before, like the larks in this country that have been singing the same 5 notes for over thousands of years." And then there's this wonderful quote by Emily Dickinson that she shares. It was in an 1885 letter that she wrote to Eugenia Hall, and it goes like this: "I hope you love birds too. It is economical. It saves going to heaven." Aren't those great? Well, this book is chock full of great insights and quotes and readings from women as marvelous as Willa Cather and Emily Dickinson. This book is 288 pages of women finding joy in nature and then writing about it and sharing it with us. You can get a copy of Writing Wild by Catherine Alto and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $6. But as usual, hurry if you want a copy at that price because those used copies will go quickly. All right, we end the show today with a botanic spark from 1918. It was on this day, March 30th in 1918, that the Oregon Daily Journal out of Portland, Oregon, shared a front page story with a headline that read, "Slacker if he puts baseball starting time back 1 hour." And then it continues, "President Pack of the National War Garden Commission severely criticizes baseball club owner who plans to add an extra hour of daylight that could be used in garden work." Well, this article is all about Charles Lathrop Pack, who was president of the National War Garden Commission, and he was against baseball teams who were planning to change the start time of their games to take advantage of the brand new daylight savings plan. Charles said, "A move like this will take thousands of hours of time from gardens. It will doubtless mean many extra dollars in the box office, but it is certainly a violation of the spirit of the law." Well, in other media, Charles reminded both baseball leagues that the law was intended to increase the daylight usefulness in war work, and it was not intended to give extra hours for recreation. And then he says, "Slackers of the worst type" is the brand placed upon baseball league owners or managers who plan to move down the scheduled time of starting games this summer. Well, there was a huge kerfuffle about this, but the historian Michael O'Malley noted in his book, Keeping Watch, that came out in 1996, that as the president of the War Garden Commission, Charles Lathrop Pack was essentially the head of a lobbying organization for the makers of garden products, tools, seeds, fertilizers, canning and preservation equipment, and he stood to gain dramatically from any increase in wartime gardening. So there's always an angle. All right, well, that's it for today's show. Just remember that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.